Should big labor stooges do away with the 2011 collective bargaining law? Local government will pay billions, writes Will Flanders, Research Director at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, in a new op-ed in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Vicki McKenna Show.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on, and early Happy New Year to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. To you, too. It may not be a happy 2026 if Act 10 goes away. It has, again, had such significant impact, billions upon billions of dollars in taxpayer savings. What are the means for this to disappear? It is in the court system right now. What is the status on that?
Yeah, so we're hearing a lot from the left about affordability, right? That's the buzzword right now, and they're attempting to blame the Trump administration for rising costs. But as I was hearing all this, I'm thinking, you don't have any sort of leg to stand on so long as you're going to continue to support getting rid of Act 10. As you mentioned with MacGyver, what you guys have done over there, the sort of overall quantification of how much it saved over time on an annual basis, we're looking at least $2 billion in new costs on local governments and school districts if this went away. So it's a huge problem. It's a huge new cost that'll be borne by taxpayers around the state. In answer to your question about the status, it's going to be heard by the state Supreme Court coming up. But now there's another avenue we ought to be concerned about. You sort of alluded to it in your intro, and that's if elections go a certain way, then there's going to be another threat to Act 10, and that's a repeal through the legislative process. So two potential paths for it to go away in the next year or two.
Yeah, definitely. Let's deal with the first branch. You have narrow majorities right now in the Assembly and the Senate. Change of district maps could indeed have a huge impact on who controls the legislature, who controls the executive branch after two terms under perhaps the union's biggest stooge in Governor Tony Evers, a Democrat. And now, of course, you have a 4-3 majority locked in on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The court side of things, though, is interesting because you have at least a couple of those liberal justices, you could make an argument, ought to be recusing themselves from any decision on this law because of their activities and their statements on the campaign trail. Is that really a likelihood moving forward?
Yeah, I'd say given the track record we've seen on other instances where they ought to have recused themselves, I'm not going to really hold out hope that's going to happen here. So I think we're likely to have the full court making these decisions, which, as you say, is the 4-3 majority one way at the moment. And again, given what we've seen from this court so far, even though from our legal side, I don't speak for our lawyers on the policy side, but from the legal side, we think the arguments are pretty weak in terms of repealing Act 10. I don't think that's something that'll be a strong enough barrier for them to not enact their politically favored agenda potentially.
Yeah, Supreme Court back several years ago, I believe the final ruling was 5-2 that said you may not like this policy, particularly if you are a union member. The policy, the law that reformed public sector collective bargaining in the state of Wisconsin that really for the first time gave taxpayers a seat at the bargaining table. They never had, or at least they didn't have for a long time. What are the arguments, if you will, to keep Act 10 in place, the arguments that even union bought and paid for Supreme Court justices can't beat back?
Yeah, so I think, beyond the legal arguments, which again I think are sound on the side in favor of Act 10, and we can go into that potentially another day, but the reality is that the hole this would drive in the budgets of school districts and local governments is simply untenable. We've talked to a lot of school district superintendents, often off the record, because they face challenges in standing up here with the teachers and folks that work for them, but there is simply no way that we can go back on some of these reforms. I mentioned a $2 billion hole in budgets for local governments around the state. About 1.5 of that is from school districts. The reason it's not quite as bad in local governments is because police and fire were exempt, and that's a big part of local government spending. But, where does this come from? Well, it comes from going back to collectively bargaining salaries. If we go back to collectively bargaining salaries, we go back to the trajectory we were on prior to Act 10, shoot up costs tremendously. Another area is in health insurance. We've all seen our health insurance premiums rising, even in the private sector. We've all seen those costs going up year over year. If we go back to the union-style health insurance policies that we had before, we're still spending less today than we were prior to Act 10, and that's not even adjusting for inflation. So you can imagine how much those costs would shoot up in the absence of the reforms that were made with teachers contributing to their health care. And then we have retirement costs. We simply ask that teachers and other public sector workers contribute to those costs. We take that away. That's another cost on local government. So if you like some of the programs that your school district offers, and districts are already claiming poverty, they're going to be claiming poverty to a new level that we've never heard of before, and they'll have more justification for it than they do under current circumstances without Act 10.
Will Flanders, Research Director at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, joining us about his new op-ed in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. The dour financial situation the end of Act 10 could present local government, school boards across the state. It's interesting to me, as we've covered this story over the last decade and a half, you've had liberal local governments or left-leaning local governments. When push comes to shove, they acknowledge, yeah, these have been critical savings for us every year. It's been, you take away this, and how do you go about balancing a budget? And Will, I ask that with another huge expense facing school districts and property taxpayers over the years, and that's Tony Evers' 400-year property tax increase that keep going up and up to cover the cost of public education. Now, this thing could get really expensive for local governments.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The 400-year veto, a lot of people saw the impact of that this year on their taxes, right? People get their tax bill, and it's gone up substantially. Now, some of that is referenda, which is another area that obviously we're seeing illogical expansion of over the last few years, with I think 25% of districts going to referendum last year. And then you have the Milwaukee referendum, which is taking money away from other districts in the state. Districts around the state lost about $182 million among those that lost revenue. More than half of that went to Milwaukee. So there are a whole bunch of different things that are sort of helping out these more left-leaning areas of the state, let's say. But you're absolutely right that that these costs in a variety of different ways are just likely to continue to increase in the future. 400-year veto, it snowballs every single year. It's 325, then it's 650, then it's another 325 on top of that exponentially every single year. So every year it's bigger, every year it snowballs more, and every year you're going to see that impact on your taxes.
It'd be very, very costly. Obviously, we'll be watching the Supreme Court, and then by the time you get to November of 2026, there could be a change. That's why elections have consequences, and some really big consequences coming up at the third and the second and first branches as well. Will, thank you so much for your time. Very interesting piece, very thought-provoking, and really a word of caution moving forward. You can find Will's piece at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Will Flanders, Research Director at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Happy New Year to you, my friend.
Thanks so much. Have a good afternoon.